Hi everyone, welcome to week 2. This week in week 2, we are looking at overrepresentation in special education. And when we think about overrepresentation, I want you to not only think about cultural diversity, which is what some of the readings you have this week focus on, but I want you to look at and examine any subgroup or any population in your school that is receiving special education services that you have a higher number of. So do you have more students than the average that are culturally diverse or ELL receiving special ed services? Do you have more students that are a certain ethnicity or a certain race receiving IEP services? You can even look at students that are lower socioeconomic status. Do you have a higher number of those students receiving special education services? And when we see that we have an overrepresentation of a certain subgroup receiving IEP service, special education services, that's telling us that, number one, we might have an issue at our school with how we are delivering our standards-based instruction, our Tier 1 instruction, how we are meeting the needs of those students just in the day-to-day classroom activities. And is that the reason why they are being referred to special ed more often? Because we are not instructing them properly to begin with. Is there a misunderstanding of best practices? And so that's something that as a principal you have to examine and look at. If there's a higher number of students being referred and identified than the average, that might indicate an issue with how they're being taught, how teachers are approaching them, and that might be something else that you need to address at your school. So what you'll be looking at, when you look at the PowerPoint that I have posted, I've given you some national data to look at. Something else that you'll see in the PowerPoint, you'll look at the typical average number of students that are identified for each disability area. Something else to be considered of two. Do you have a higher number of students with LD, autism, ADHD, things like that? That's always important to look at when you have numbers that are spiking higher than others. It helps us to pause and consider why that is and to really investigate it and find the reason why. Another thing to look at, so if your school doesn't officially provide special education services, and this can go for the public school as well, you can also consider your RTI tiers, and you can look at the number of students that are in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 3 would be your special education students or the ones receiving the highest level of intervention. But if you're a school that has a significantly high number of students in Tier 2, significantly more than Tier 1, you don't have a Tier 2 problem. You don't have a problem with your Tier 2 interventions. You have a Tier 1 problem. You have a problem delivering standards-based instruction. You have a problem on your ground floor. Your standards-based overall instruction, your Tier 1, should be about 80% of your school population. Your Tier 2 should be about 15%. And then that Tier 3 should be that smallest, that 5%. So if you have a significant number of students that are being referred to for intervention, for additional support, you might want to look at how, again, you are delivering instruction on the ground floor with your standards-based curriculum, and does more work need to be done there? So these are all things that you're going to investigate and look at and research this week with week 2. This is the first week where we start our focus guides. The focus guides are the document that will have 2 to 3 questions for you to reflect on. They typically follow the pattern of provide me a brief summary of research on this topic so I understand and that you understand the best practice. You evaluate your school compared to that best practice. So again, we're finding the gaps in how well your school implements it. And then you come up with 3 recommendations for improvement for your school. So the focus guides will follow this pattern. Typically through week 5, you do the research, you find the best practice, you evaluate your school, you find the gap between desired state and your current state, and then you do recommendations to improve it. And you follow this pattern because, again, this gets you prepared and ready to do your case study in week 6 and 7, because that's what you're doing. You say, okay, what's the research? Where's my school at? How do we need to improve? What's my plan to improve? That's where you want it, the mindset that you want to get into each week. And I tried to start us getting into that in week 1, just really informally, and now we're diving into it.